Also, the women's movement was anti-man. And so you had a combination of social policy, but policy alone wouldn't have done it. The federal government enticed welfare, blacks to go on welfare. Blacks' welfare used to be stigmatized in the black community.
It's crazy that I even have to say something like this, but unfortunately, we live in a sort of upside down where the belief systems are so much more powerful than the reality that it's almost like it's like stripping a piece of steak from a pit bull when you're trying to get somebody to open their eyes to the fact that it is not racism or any other ism that is holding them back, more specifically in a Western country such as the United States, but instead it is your mindset. It is your cultural norms. It is the things in which you value and do not value. When you look at your life and the results that you're getting right now, if you have one of these smartphones in your hand, it probably means that you're already living in some level of privilege as a human being. If you're living in 2024 anywhere, you have it better than everybody historically, than even royalty in the 15 and the 1600s, right? And that's a fact. Even your ability to be able to turn a tap on and water comes out, whatever quality of water it is, that's better living than King Henry III. So we've gotten to this place where we are indoctrinated with these ideas that it is racism holding us back, etc. And it has been a concerted effort to push this propaganda in order to have the people be divisive. Divide and conquer has always been the most powerful tool of individuals who look to rule in the shadows. Those individuals who want to oppress or suppress in the shadows. And that's the only way you actually can manipulate anybody in a real way. You have to be hidden about it. Otherwise, the person will realize who's doing it. They will see the Oz behind the curtain, and they will no longer be afraid because they see that you are flesh of flesh, blood of blood. They see that you are human as they are, right? And that is always my core message before I even get into this is, yes, there is racism. Yes, there is sexism. Yes, there is homophobia. In some places more so than others. Like, obviously, there's always going to be ignorant individuals. However, these are not the hurdles that are keeping the individual from becoming all that they can be. It is an individual's belief system, not the system of white supremacy, that holds back an individual from becoming what they want to become. It is the belief system, not the system of the patriarchy, that is holding a woman back within the Western world. Now, if you go into maybe some of the Islamic world, etc., might be a very different story for you. But as far as here, in places like this, you have it better than most people who have ever existed. I don't think I could get that point across enough times. You have it better than most people who have ever existed in the history of our species. And yet, in this day and age, we have more retaliation, we have more resentment and anger, we have more frustration and protesting against the very things that are now actually privileges for us. People who are being uplifted simply because of their identity are the ones who are yelling the most and yelling the loudest that they are the oppressed, keeping themselves stuck within their own psyche when life outside of them is nothing but opportunity. So that being said, I want to get into this conversation with this brother right here, old school brother. And the reason I brought this one up specifically is because he's somebody who was alive before Jim Crow was abolished, right? Before Lyndon Baines Johnson was forced to sign the paperwork for the Civil Rights Act in 64, 65. Actually, I think it was 64, then it came into play in 65. As the Republicans in the House and Senate majority pushed that legislation through, Jim Crow was finally over. This man was there to see that black folk were doing better on the other side. And now 40, 50, 60 years later, what the hell happened? So we're going to get into that conversation. I'm going to give my 2 cents as we move forward. Get yourself some water. You know, I like my little heated water. I like hot water. I prefer it over tea in some cases, most cases. I'm weird like that.
It is not a race problem in America.
When you say that, a lot of people would disagree with you, and they would say, how could you say that? You know, maybe maybe it wasn't back then, but you don't know the America today. You know, you don't know what's going on with the challenges they're facing and the level of racism they're experiencing today in the marketplace, because maybe you are disconnected, kind of like how you were when you thought everybody was black until you joined the Army and you realized that your unit, only 8 were black. What do you say to the people that literally 100% disagree with you and they say there is racism today? It is a challenging time today. What do you say to them?
I say, look at the evidence. Look at the evidence. You know, a lot of people are like the farmer that came to the creek when it was like coming, it was 3 feet high and moving at about 20 miles an hour, and he forced the mule in and they were swept down the creek. A year later, he comes to the same crossing. This time it's only 6 inches. The mule refuses to go in because the mule had good memory but poor judgment. Conditions were not like they were back.
That is such a bar right there. For anybody who didn't catch that metaphor, it's essentially saying muscle memory, right? When you have had an experience, an adverse experience, or even you've internalized an experience, sometimes it's not even what you went through, it's what you heard over and over again. A belief is formed through the repetition of a message. So if you have a message of racism, 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 you know, it's the white man, the white man, the white man, you will go through life with that perspective, seeing life through those lenses. And so you will have opportunities presented to you. And because of your own confirmation bias, you can't take advantage of that because the white man's holding you back, because racism is holding you back. You won't even introspect to say, what did I do in this situation to either get the opportunity or not get the opportunity? Some people have the stankest attitudes in the customer service job. They get fired and they blame white supremacy. And y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. The ones you know probably haven't even got fired yet, and they deserve to.
In segregation, when I was locked up twice in Mississippi, the conditions have changed, but many of us have. But again, look at the evidence. When whites were at their worst, we were at our best. As I said, in 1930 to 1940, when segregation and racism was enshrined in law, blacks had the highest marriage rate of any group in society. Elderly people could walk safely in those communities without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. So let's look at the evidence. When we refused access to hotels, we built our own hotels, financed by our own means. The Wallahaji in Atlanta, the Carver and Calvert Hotel in Florida, the St. Charles in Chicago, the St. Teresa in New York. I could go on and on. When we were denied access to colleges, we built our own. And in fact, our small business formation rate was higher than whites in the 20s. And that
I could never imagine being a direct ancestor of somebody like a Sexy Red or a Pooh Shiesty or something like that. And just looking down and say, this is what you did with what we fought so hard for. This is what you did. This is what you regressed into and you allowed yourself to regress into. Now, of course, we're going to get into the conversation of, again, how we got here, but it would be heartbreaking for me to think that all of that went to waste. You know what I mean? That I just got the full visual right now. I could just see this image of, you know, just the past looking forward into the future to say, this is what we degenerated into.
That really determines any group's participation in the economy. It is not what government does for you or what white people do. In fact, I think those who continue to push this race agenda are Eurocentric. They assume that the destiny of blacks is determined by what white people do. That has never been the case. We closed the education gap in the South between 1920 and 1940. How do we do it? Julius Rosenwald, the CEO of Sears, came together with Booker T. Washington, and he put up $4 million. The black community matched it with $4.8 million. We built 5,000 schools to teach ex-slaves how to read and write. And as a consequence of that study, that in between 1920 and 1940, the education gap in the South between whites and blacks was 3 years, 8th grade for whites, 5th grade for blacks. Mm-hmm. Within 20 years, that gap closed within 6 months. There were 5 high schools at the turn of the century in New York, Baltimore, Washington, Atlanta, and New Orleans. They had used textbooks, overcrowded classrooms, half the budgets of white schools, but every one of those schools out-tested every white school in those cities. If we were able to close the education...
There's this quote, and it is one that stuck with me throughout life, is hard times make strong men, and strong men make easy times or good times, and those good times make weak men. And that's the sense that I get when I'm listening to this brother, speak of our history, is to say we were in dire straits, as people throughout history in different times, where times were hard. I recently watched, Free State of Jones. You guys should watch that. I highly recommend it. And you see the level of poverty, or what we would call poverty, like the destitute state of most humans, right? Like, it was survival for most people in this country. You had to build your own infrastructure by hand. You had to catch your own food, etc. There was no grocery store. There was no, hit up a real estate agent or whatever it may be. And especially in warring times and things of that nature, which much of history has been warring peoples and conquering of different peoples throughout the entire world. That loves to, people love to blame, the white man was the conquering man. No, all people were conquering all people. That's how you ended up having an Egyptian empire or a Persian empire or, an Ottoman empire, things of that nature. But I digress. So you have these difficult times that make men and women resilient. We become innovative, creative, focused, intentional. Then you now have times like this one, the DoorDash age, right? The scrolling age. And I'm guilty as anybody of all these, but nevertheless, we live in a time where it is so easy to be a human that it's like the purpose has been siphoned from people. And so they create these synthetic purposes, fighting imaginary dragons. Lightning and the thunder. My girl was definitely singing that this morning, so hello, subconscious. We created such easy times that they're creating the weakest generation, weaker than probably has ever existed. And I'm not saying that just to say it because it's trendy, but that's what science is saying. Testosterone levels are lower than they've ever been within men, and higher within women. Ironically enough, right? Advents such as the pill, which completely destroy the hormonal structure, infertility rate, like literal degeneracy. People are getting dumber. Brain size is shrinking. Yeah. And we can point to environmental factors. We can point to, obviously what some of these big food and big ag or whatever it may be that are in collusion with that shadow government aspect. But even with that, we make decisions on a day-to-day basis of what we're going to consume and what we will not, what we're going to put up with and what we won't. And we've chosen convenience over, taking control of something. And though it's hard, I had this conversation with my girl yesterday. It's like, we basically give over our power to, let's say, that company that we work for, to say, okay, take care of my future. Here's some money, take care of my future. And then when that time comes, 65, 67, whatever the age may be, now you're like, what the hell happened to my money? What happened with this? I'm taxed at 30, 50%, whatever it may be. What's going on? You become resentful, but you still put your future in somebody else's hands. You're buying all these box products, instead of going into the produce section or the butcher section, whatever, eating whole foods with one ingredient. And then we blame, the corporation for poisoning us. It's like, yeah, they're creating manufactured foods and we choose those manufactured foods. We can make any excuse that we want for it. Of course, we can definitely do that, but it's not going to change the fact that we're putting our life into somebody else's hands. And again, that's a sign of that weakness, convenience over anything else.
Gap between 1920 and 1940 through self-determination and hard work. If we were able to out-test white schools in those cities, then the question is, in those same schools today in Baltimore, for instance, where they're run by blacks, not a single student could read at grade level or perform at grade level. And so how can you say that it is racism that is the cause of the present day challenges. When under segregation, we achieved. One other example we gave from our studies, in 1943, blacks were prohibited from being naval officers. Eleanor Roosevelt persuaded her husband to train them, so they selected 16 black college-educated men for training, the Naval Academy, not the Academy, Naval Training Center. The Navy says, aha, we're going to give these black cadets in 8 weeks what we give white cadets in 16, so they'll wash out. When these brothers found out what the deal was, they covered the windows in their barracks and stayed up all night and studied. And when they were tested, they scored in the 90th percentile.
Wow.
So then they said, well, they cheated. So they tested them individually. They scored in the 93rd percentile. 13 of them eventually became naval officers. They call them the Golden 13. You can look
Google
it up.
this?
That test, the test scores today has never been bettered. So
because we disincentivize excellence, and this is a conversation I will have till my very last breath. When you have initiatives that you believe are going to help a certain subsect of people by essentially enabling their mediocrity, which means, putting together affirmative action or DEI, it sounds good on the surface, right? We're going to let people in who might not otherwise have certain opportunities, and we're actually going to put them ahead of those who, let's say, just met the qualifications. So they're inherently racist just in their own way, or they're exclusionary within their own way, right? So we're going to prop these ones up and we're going to bump these ones down. Okay. So the ones who are being bumped up are at least progressively going to get less and less incentivized to actually qualify. Like if you had the potential to be an A student, but you only need a B- to get in because of a certain program, why not just go for the B-? Why not just settle? Why put in the hard work to get the A and go overboard when you're going to be accepted into the program anyway? You know what I mean? So that's the thing that always gets me about hearing, and I heard this story once before from this individual right here. And the thing that really got me was the fact that, again, it's like it was genuine, like hostility and segregation to say, no, there's no way you could have passed it. You're going to have to take it again. That's like the segregatory aspect, the racist aspect, I guess you could say, right? It's like they literally had to work twice as hard as everybody else to get, what they desire to get. And they eventually got it because it was excellence. It's like even that systemic racism had to accept, excellence. You know what I mean? Like we got to let excellence in because excellence is going to get the job done. And that's the thing. It's like we live in a day and age where it's easier than ever. And you're even kind of given an edge up, even if you're mediocre. Imagine if you're excellent. You will be unfireable. A company cannot, unless they close their doors, cannot get rid of a person who is excellent. Now, many of us have this conflated or inflated version of ourselves in our head. Or maybe that's just me. But, some of us have this, I am excellent. I am good enough. I am all that. I'm the table. I'm the kitchen sink. I'm the wall. I'm the drywall. I'm everything. I'm the paint. I'm him. And when reality comes to check, we can't introspect to say, oh, maybe I could actually brush up on this. Maybe I can deepen my intelligence. Maybe I can, I can educate myself. Maybe I can go deeper in the research. Maybe I can get new skill sets. Maybe I'm not actually made for the space that I'm in. We can start to introspect and to maneuver, but instead we're so prideful that we think, no, I don't need to do nothing different. You need to accept me because racism, sexism, whatever it is. And it actually makes, again, for a weaker population. You have more incompetency, which makes incompetent organizations inferior products and services. And then those companies actually start to make less money. Then they start to fire the very people they should be hiring to stimulate the economy, to become, a larger and larger company that is hiring more people to do, higher end work. That's how that works. It's almost like the snake eating its own tail, in essence. I know that analogy is obviously used as like reincarnation or, but it's this cyclical thing of It always comes to bite itself back in the butt. That's what I'm going for. Always. It looks good in the, in the beginning. It looks like it's going somewhere, and it's only consuming itself.
Again, I respond to people with evidence. The incarceration rates of blacks from the turn of the century up to the 60s was under 25%.
Incarceration was under 25%.
Under 25%.
Where are we at
it
today?
It shot up to I think it was like 90,000 blacks were in jail in 1960. That went up to 900,000 over the next 30 years.
Why do you think that is? What happened? What changed?
In our studies, red, white, and black, we looked at the experiences. We looked at 6 major plantations to find out what the state of marriage was of slaves. 75% of those slaves had a man and woman raising children. The nuclear family continued to prosper in the face of segregation for 100 years. But all of that changed in the 60s with the poverty programs.
Lyndon Johnson?
Yes. Johnson came in, and what happened was the social scientists who were pushing socialism on America, Cloud and Piven at Columbia, said if you disconnect work from income, then school dropout rates will increase, drug addiction, all of those things. And so what the government did was offer welfare as an alternative to a man in the house. We relaxed the rules. We separated work from income, and as a consequence, that was supported by the Black Power movement. Also, the women's movement was anti-man. And so you had a combination of social policy, but policy alone wouldn't have done it. The federal government enticed blacks to go on welfare. Welfare used to be stigmatized in the black community. But the federal government began to interpret it as reparations and as entitlements. They withdrew any requirement that you should tell the paternity of the father, paternity in cases of pregnancy. All of these, so that more blacks came into the welfare system in the first 5 years of the 70s. Then millions flooded into the system at a time when the unemployment rate was under 4%. Mm-hmm. So it is a combination of social policies plus the civil rights movement morphed into a race grievance industry, and many of those civil rights leaders became mayors and elected to public office, where we spent $22 trillion during that period on programs to aid the poor, where 70 cents of every dollar went not to the poor, but those who served the poor.
What percentage of it?
70%.
70% of the $22 trillion went to the people that served the poor.
They asked.
It's an industry. Just like in California, Gavin Newsom has been the greatest. He has been the greatest CEO of the homeless industrial complex. I'll put it that way. And yet the problem of homelessness has gotten significantly worse. $23 billion spent, plus probably at this point, on homelessness in California. And we are in the worst shape we have ever been in California. But I digress. I want to dip into just this last point, and then you guys can watch the rest on your own accord. I'll make sure to link the video below. But it is it's interesting to me how this conversation of wow, voice is finally breaking. It's interesting to me how the conversation of, social welfare reforms, etc., is like anything else. It's a polarized thing, because you have one group of people on the far left who believe that Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, was this hero for black people, right? And you have those who see him as the downfall and demise of the black community within America. Of course, I stand on this side because I understand the nuances. But we do have to address the other side to say, okay, of course, it would look good to have this president who's finally coming in saying, you guys have been taken advantage of, you've been grieved, you have lost property, You have had, your cities torn down, whatever it may be. Mind you, these were democratic initiatives that led to these things, right? Jim Crow was a democratic piece of legislation from 1870. Andrew Johnson, I believe, was the president at the time. You have, obviously, slavery that was abolished, which the Democratic Party was looking to keep intact. So Lyndon Baines Johnson is a Democratic president after JFK's assassination, which is still very sketchy, but nevertheless, you have this man come in and all of a sudden he switches up his entire act. He's kind of like a Joe Biden, right? It's like in the early 70s, 80s, he's calling black people, niggas with the hard R. And, fast forward, he is now the president for the POC, the people of color. If you vote for Donald Trump, you're not black, right? These are actual words from that man, Joe Biden. So LBJ becomes the face of, it's like black, not liberation, but compensation, black compensation. Here you go. Here's the programs. Here's welfare. Here's this. Here's that. But all of that was for one result, which was the incentivizing of black folk to rely on government, right? So it didn't matter if they were poor, they were rich, they were this or that, so long as they relied on government. That was the baseline aspect of it. We want you to come to us instead of relying upon yourselves. We want you to come to us, women, ladies, instead of relying upon your man. Then they give you the clinics to unalive your own babies. And, they're the ones who gave you your own ammunition to destroy yourselves. And so that's exactly what happened. There was a destruction from within based upon those policies. People love to point to the war on drugs, etc. That was already down the road. We're talking about the 80s now. That's down the road. Oh, but the incarceration, the mass incarceration of black folk, absolutely. But you have to look at what environments were these. These weren't the same neighborhoods of the 60s, the 50s, and the 40s. These were now broken down Section 8 housing that was a direct byproduct of LBJ. Yeah. So, but what do I know, right? Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Drink plenty of water. Drink just enough water. You understand me? If you're going to do anything today, drink water. Simple as that. Appreciate y'all. Till the next time. Peace.
I used to be afraid of the dark, place unknown like a heart in their heart. I used to see my life in the bar. Now the kids unchained, every shackle is lost. 2 steps in the moonlight, 2 step in the daytime. You just know when it feel right. You got a feeling the time's not. See you through those shades that I just threw on. Through my lenses, you just can't do no wrong. I fell in love with myself again. I fell in love with myself. I fell in love with the sunshine. I fell in love with the light. I fell in love with the full moon. I fell in love with